Terry here with Blunt Trips, coming to you from Fairmont Cemetery in Aurora, Colorado. Today I am looking for the unmarked grave of rape and murder victim 12-year-old Louise Frost. Died November 8th, 1900. And when I started this case, it started with one victim. Immediately, I realized there was a second. By the time I was done with this case, had me questioning if there was actually a third. All right, I'm going to get started on the story, and in the end, I'm going to ask you one question. Who do you think should be held accountable for these deaths? Again, I am Terry, you're watching Blunt Trips, and let's get started. Terry here with Blunt Trips, coming to you from Fairmont Cemetery in Aurora, Colorado, just outside of Denver. I know I cover a lot of cases out here because there's a lot of famous cases, a lot of crime cases. But today, the case I'm covering is one of the most shocking and horrific crimes I've covered to date. And according to this paper in my hand, the gravesite I'm looking for is an unmarked grave. It's going to be right about here. According to this piece of paper right here, it shows that the grave I am looking for is actually an unmarked grave right to the east of Mary and John Bass. That would put the grave that I'm looking for right here. Now, there's actually two people buried in this grave, and when I started this case, I was only looking at one murder. It immediately pointed to two, and by the time I was done, had me questioning if there was a third one. And by the time I'm done, not only will you question the same thing, but you may have a better idea who was actually guilty of this crime. So today, I am at the gravesite of Louise Frost. Murder victim, rape victim, on November 8th, 1900. This is where her and her 2-year-old sister, who died 4 years prior, are buried. There is no marker, but this is the spot right in front of Mary and John Bass. And I'm going to tell you the story of why I'm here. And when I'm done, you decide who put these two girls here. Thursday, November 8th, 1900. It was a cold day on the Colorado Prairie. When school ended that afternoon, 12-year-old Louise Frost, only child left of well-known area sheep rancher, hitched up her horse and buggy in the small town of Lyman, 80 miles southeast of Denver. Sometime after 5 o'clock that afternoon, the horse and buggy arrived back at the ranch. There was a lap quilt folded carefully, candy and letters still in the seat, but Louise wasn't there. Alarmed, her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Frost, followed the route all the way back to Lyman, but found no signs of their daughter. Within minutes, the townspeople and neighbors were alerted, and a small group of men in the town gathered near the railroad. I'm sorry about the airplane above. Hopefully you guys can hear me. After searching for several hours, the search party heard some moans coming from a shallow ravine. It turned out to be Louise Frost, who was barely alive at the time. At the bottom of the gully, she laid there. Both the Denver Times and the Rocky Mountain News reported the young girl had a total of 14 stab wounds inflicted to both breasts, the neck, forehead, and a gaping gash across the entire length of her right thigh. Her skull was also fractured from the impact of a heavy boot. She had been raped. Some of her blood had actually turned to icicles where she laid. 2 doctors at the scene revived her, and when they did, she whispered, "Yes, Mama, I'm home," and then lapsed back into unconsciousness. She died around midnight that night. The Times reported people at the scene agreed that she must have known her attacker because there was no signs of a struggle. It appeared that she had walked willingly to the place where the assault occurred. The only piece of evidence were a set of boot tracks and a plaid silk necktie soaked in blood, believed to have been torn from her attacker. Now this gets a little bit more twisted, because by the time I'm done, we're going to be right back here at this grave, and I'm going to ask you guys, who do you think put these 2 girls there? Because there's actually 2 girls in this empty spot. 4 years prior to Louise being murdered, she had a sister that's 2 years old. Supposedly she choked to death. Supposedly. Now let it be known that after the murder, the father and mother did end up leaving state. I did look for a grave out here for them. Ironically, there was only 2 Robert Frost in the state of Colorado that are buried, and one of them would have only been around 10 or 11 years old at the time of her death. And the other one, ironically, is buried right here in this cemetery. I thought I found her father, but come to find out, it was just coincidence. The years, the age, the name, only one thing was different: the middle initial. So I got to looking, and I was like, well, where's the father at? Certainly he has to be dead by now. It's been over 122 years since this girl was put in a grave. Well, as I get into the story, I'll tell you, the father was involved in another crime, and he ended up disappearing, moving out of the state of Colorado, from my understanding, moved out further west, if I read correctly, and I couldn't tell you where he's buried today. But nonetheless, there's actually 2 Frost girls buried here, a 2-year-old and a 12-year-old. But this crime doesn't stop here. It actually gets worse. So I'm going to tell you guys now what happened after Louise Frost was murdered. Then we'll end up back here at the grave, and I got one question for you guys in the end. So stay watching, and we'll see you back here at the end of the video. What is up, fuckers? Terry here with Blunt Trips, coming to you from my home in Aurora, Colorado today, to tell you about the second victim in this case. That would be Preston Porter Jr. Now, I'm not going to sit here and put on makeup like some people or get drunk and tell you the story, but I will smoke this blunt with you and get my facts straight. So, with that said, let's get on with the second part of this story. So, after Louise was murdered, a couple people were accused in town. There was very few black people back in Lyman back in 1900. And times were very racial at the time. So,
there was 3 people that were questioned and released prior to the porters being arrested, and of course they were all black. Um, and when black people started being accused of this crime, the porters quickly fled for Denver because they knew they were about to be accused of this as well. So they left for Denver, and when they arrived there, they were arrested on November 11th. Now, from November 11th, for 3 days, they were repeatedly moved from different sweat boxes and interrogation rooms. And eventually, Porter kept maintaining his innocence for a while. And eventually, they threatened to lynch both his father and his brother if he didn't confess. So he confessed. Shit, my blunt went out. No wonder why some people do makeup. Anyways, after he confessed, that sealed his fate. The governor at the time had ordered that he be held for 7 days to prevent a public execution, but that didn't matter. On November 16th, at approximately 4 p.m. on that Friday, the last train from Denver arrived into Lyman, Colorado, and when it arrived, there was 300 angry people waiting for Preston Porter Jr. Now, it said that he was reading the Bible on the train on his way there. He knew his fate, so... Damn it, my blunt went out again. I had to turn on the AC because the soundproofing is being put in up here, and it gets hot as fuck in this room, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. But in the process, that AC is right in front of me and it blows my blunts out, so... Anyways. Alright, where was I? Anyways, as soon as he got off the train, he was tied up to a horse and carriage and dragged for 1 mile to where the body was found of Louise Frost. Now, when he arrived, or when he was dragged to this location, he was tied and chained, both tied and chained to a stake that they put in the ground at this same spot where they found Louise's body. And they poured oil on him. And, well, it gets really bad from here. At 23 minutes after 6, Robert Frost lit an oily rag and threw it onto the waiting timber that was soaked in oil. And as it caught fire, the teenager started screaming, "Oh my God, let me go. Please let me go. Oh my God, oh my God." He then cried out, "Tell Papa I've gone to heaven." After he was engulfed in flames, he couldn't speak anymore, but his screams were heard for 12 minutes long. Long after that, Preston Porter Jr. took his final tormented breath, and the crowd continued vigorously and cheered him. they, they cheered him. Long after his last breath, the crowd continued to celebrate. They continued to celebrate his death. And when nothing was left but charred bones and ashes, the men finally dispersed. To this day, there is no actual grave, of course, for Preston Porter Jr., because there was nothing left to bury. His remains were left actually right where he was burned. Now, not only was nobody ever found guilty for Louise Frost murder, somebody was accused by an angry mob, but nobody was actually found guilty. But this AC keeps blowing my blunt out, man. nobody was even really questioned in the death of Preston Porter. Not one person. Um, Booker T. Washington denounced the crime and demanded justice, but at the time, Governor Charles Thomas, he was a Georgia-born politician, refused to intervene, and the sheriff at the time, Sheriff Freeman, refused to arrest or even identify anybody of that angry mob, even though to this day there is pictures of this angry mob hanging on the wall in a library in Denver. But nobody was ever tried and convicted for it. Not just that, but history has it written down as Robert Frost being the man that organized the mob that executed this Preston Porter Jr., yet nobody knows who's responsible for it. It makes no sense. History shows who's responsible for it. Now, this Robert Frost, it's strange because he knew where his daughter was going that day. He was very quick to try and find somebody to blame. Of course, when somebody doesn't want to be looked at, they try and get you to look at somebody else. In the 1900s, incest was pretty common, actually, so it wouldn't be shocking that a father raped his daughter and murdered her back then. That was just some sick shit they did. There was other things when I looked into this case. Louise had a 2-year-old sister that died 4 years prior from choking to death. That wasn't really looked into. Some other stuff. Right after Preston Porter was killed and stuff, Robert Frost ended up leaving Colorado. Now, he was a pretty rich rancher. He had it made, but he just upped and booked. He left the state. I found that out after trying to find his grave. I found out that he ended up hauling ass. So, and there was some other strange things that I found when I was looking into this case. A couple other strange things. Another thing that I found strange was the horse and carriage came back to the ranch that was like not close. It was more than 10 miles, if I remember correctly, from where their ranch was and where the girl was found murdered. It came back to the ranch, supposedly on its own, and it had the candy still in the carriage. It had a folded blanket and some other items. But how the horse knew how to get back on its own, in a timely manner at that. It didn't take long. The horse came right back. There was just so many strange things in this case that when I looked at it, I was like, okay, wait a minute. Why did nobody look at the family for this? But looking back, I'll remind you guys to look into it if you're interested, and you guys decide. You guys decide who you think committed this crime. I think all fingers point to Robert Frost. He was definitely quick to make sure somebody else to blame. He hauled ass after. He was there, or knew where all the victims were, or where to find the victims. His name just popped up every time there's a dead body. If you ask me, the guy was definitely involved, but who knows? Now, it was weird because as I was doing this case, I started out looking into Louise Frost as a murder case, and it pointed straight to Preston Porter, but then it pointed me back to Louise Frost as I found out she had a sister who had died too, and then I started to see how Robert Frost claimed that he only had one kid in the newspaper, but that wasn't actually true. He actually had 2 kids. One had died 4 years prior. There was just a lot of strange things in this case. When I looked at it, I'm like, looking back, there's only one person that really looks guilty. It's the person that made sure that everybody else around him looked guilty. Or all the white people was standing behind him to watch somebody be pointed at and found guilty. I don't know. Strange case. You guys decide. I'm just here to put out the video. I try to find interesting cases, and this one was very interesting. It was actually one that Trump wanted to have erased from history. And the more I looked into this, the more I was like, wow, why the fuck are they trying to erase this? Anyways, I'm going to wrap this part up because there's still part of this video back out at the graveyard. And I hope you guys enjoy this one. If you haven't liked and subscribed, be sure to do so. Till next part of this video, stay cool, fuckers.
Alright, Terry here with Blunt Trips, back here at Fairmont Cemetery to wrap up this video. Now, we've already established that Louise has a 2-year-old sister buried here. And we already covered the murder of Louise Frost. And now we've covered Now we covered the murder of Preston Porter. I didn't want to trip over somebody's tombstone back there. So, with all 3 of these people dead, 2 of them buried right here, and 1, there was nothing left to bury. There was 1 person involved with all of this who actually was never questioned. See, first you had a daughter that was 2 years old that supposedly choked to death. And then you had a second daughter who disappeared, but 2 people in that home where she lived knew where she was going that night, or that day. The father and the mother. So let's look a little further. After her murder, the father was quick to establish a mob and point blame at somebody. Again, there was three people, prior to Preston Porter and the Porter family being accused, that were falsely accused of this crime. But the father was really quick to get a mob together and find somebody to blame. My guess is so that everybody in town was already blaming somebody else and not looking at him. Now some of you might be saying, well, the girl was raped. Father don't rape his daughter usually. Well, in 1900, apparently family incest was pretty fucking common. So just because she was raped does not rule out the father at all. So if you ask me, the most likely suspect to kill both his daughters and put them here in this unmarked grave was the same person who established the mob to murder the boy that was accused for putting this girl in this grave. And why did the father leave right after? Why did he leave? He was a rancher, had it made here. My guess is he went to haul ass before people started to look at him. So, after looking at this case for a while, my question to you is, who do you think killed these people? Who do you think should have been held accountable? Not one person was held accountable for the death of Preston. And they got a picture to this day in a library in Denver of some of the people that watched this kid die and contribute to his death. But yet, they don't know who killed him. History shows that the father got the mob together, but they don't know who killed this kid. History says they don't know. So, with that said, I ask yourself this. who should have been held accountable for these 3 deaths. All right. I'm going to wrap this one up. It's getting a little warm out here. I'm getting a little hungry. And, man, every time I do one of these videos, I get fucking hungry afterwards. Anyways, if you haven't liked and subscribed, be sure to do so. Go ahead and share this video with your friends. And, any additional information I have on this case and links to more information about it, I'll go ahead and put in the comments section so you guys can read more on it if you're interested. Alright, well, till next time, I'm getting the fuck out of here.